When I was growing up in Sydney in the 60s and 70s, Sydney was a modest capital city of New South Wales. New South Wales was an old colonial state with boundaries drawn by the British government in the early 19th century. And its ambitions were confined by those boundaries. If you got on a train in Sydney, you had to change at the state border between New South Wales and Victoria and get on another train to get to Melbourne. It's really quite gobsmacking now to think that Sydney has achieved the genuine status as a global city. You look at Sydney CBD and you see buildings designed by international architects. You see the world's biggest law firms and finance firms and insurance firms represented. It's consistently voted by business people as one of the finest cities in the world to do business. And that's not accidental. When you sit in one of these towers of the city, firstly you see this magnificent harbour, this rich, deep, sandstone-lined harbour, which is really interesting because what this city is built on a flooded river valley, a reminder that sea level changes. And after the Pleistocene period, the waters of the earth rose as ice caps melted, and one of the wonderful consequences for Sydney, like New York, it ended up with a flooded river valley. And now Sydney's big financial business houses compete for vantage points to locate their workers over the top of this wonderful harbour. The other thing you can see from these buildings is the Pacific Ocean. You feel as if you could almost reach down onto the edge and touch Bondi or Manly and these glorious Pacific Ocean beaches. And it's a great reminder to people of Sydney of where we are. We are actually on the edge of the South Pacific. And things aren't that prosperous there. The South Pacific is a site of things that we call fragile states, where the great hope that these small nations, again with boundaries divided up by the colonial powers in the 19th century, by France, by Britain, by the Germans, by the Dutch, and with the belief that these people would have industrial pathways and reach some form of prosperity. And that hasn't happened for a variety of reasons. One thing, however, that has happened in the South Pacific is that people are moving to their cities in these Pacific areas. Not as big as Sydney or Beijing or Berlin, but nonetheless reasonably sized cities like Suva in Fiji, the capital city, or Nandi's the capital city of Fiji. People are moving to cities in the South Pacific Islands. Why do people move there? Electricity is there, jobs are there, opportunities for varieties of life for young people are there. And it's also the stepping stone to going to other places. People from the South Pacific move to their local cities. A lot then move on to Auckland, to Sydney, where there are big, substantial South Pacific communities. So cities are playing a huge role in the reconfiguration of people's lifestyles in the South Pacific. Now, that's not surprising. We only have to go back to our own Western industrial history to know that it was cities that actually started the Industrial Revolution and drove ongoing economic growth and prosperity in Western nations. And the Third World has to have urbanisation as its pathway to development. These are the concentrations where we get industrial activity, economic activity, skills development. Urbanisation is at the core of economic growth and development. The problem is that urbanisation is now creating the key sustainability problems. Not necessarily all cities, because we have cities around the world that are exemplars of close living, quality lifestyles, and they're low energy users. Surprisingly, the best example of this on the planet is Manhattan. One of the highest concentrations of people actually has the lowest use of energy per capita of any city on the planet. Sydney isn't like that. Sydney is a sprawling city. Sydney has high rates of energy usage per capita, high rates of water usage per capita. What we're now starting to understand is that our use of energy in Sydney is threatening the livelihoods of people in the South Pacific. These are the yardsticks for global sea level rise. We're starting to see already low-lying Pacific Island communities having to move to higher ground because sea level is rising. And we know that in 20, 30, 50 years' time, unless people in Sydney change the way they run its city, then the people in the South Pacific Islands are simply going to lose their islands because they are going to be underwater. It's a very simple relationship that you can see when you look out at the towers in the centre of the CBD of global Sydney, that we can't imagine a world when we're detached from our neighbours. And in Sydney's case, our neighbours are in the South Pacific, the world's most vulnerable peoples, whose own future is threatened by the way that we run Sydney. So these are very big, very important stakes.